Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us people here in person, and also those people at home. It's such a zechut. Tonight's shiur will be in honor and in memory of Morris Grunstein and Aaron Tambor, Chani and Leon Grunstein, and Chani and Len. Such amazing people. It's such a zechut to be such good friends. Thank God, always so much fun to talk to. And Bezrat Hashem, obviously Neshama should have tremendous aliyot in Shamayim. So tonight we get to really put into practice something that I talk about sometimes with my wife, that really Rabbi Mosk was supposed to give tonight, and we switched it up. We switched it up a little bit. So I always say, you know what? I think I can go at a moment's notice. This is pretty much a moment's notice. So if I get stuff wrong a little bit, if I mess up a little bit, please indulge me. My apologies. You know, we very much did not want to cancel tonight, and thank God, Baruch Hashem. I know for those people who came here hoping to see Rabbi Moskowitz, my apologies. He's a billion times better. I'm so sorry. But tonight, you're stuck with me. If you're online, at least you could press the X. At least you could do that. So tonight we get to talk about one of my rabbinic heroes. Someone who I love, even from growing up. My father's a shul rabbi, so we used to get tradition. And I remember reading when I was a kid the beautiful, amazing articles from Schneier, from Dr. Sid Lyman. Oh my, they're masterful. And he talks all about Shabtai Tzvi. And I'm one of these people, it's just something that I'm just obsessed about Shabtai Tzvi. So much so, you can see just a few of the Svarim, a few of the books that I brought concerning Shabtai Tzvi, including Gershom Shalom's book, Shabtai Tzvi, which I'm embarrassed to say, I have read 5 times. I have done that. I'm telling you, I love it. It's just so much fun to talk about. So much fun. I think a lot of it has to do with what could have been. What could have been. It's a very interesting idea, very much similar to the Patriots. What could have been had not for that, David Tyree. We don't talk about that so much, especially my grandmother. So tonight I want to talk and learn with you guys all about someone who people might not know so much about, but I think that's a real shame, and hopefully we'll do a corrective tonight, and we'll learn a bit. Last time I made a bit of a corrective about the Almohads, about how they were really an impressive group of people, and really, the Rambam might have been influenced by the Almohads, and we spoke a little bit about that last time. Tonight, I hope you guys see the greatness of Rabbi Sasportas, and Bezrat Hashem, please God, hopefully all of it is Lahagdil Torah Ladira. So we begin talking about the great Rav Yaakov Sasportas. Rav Yaakov Sasportas comes from a Sephardic world that for many of us, we might not be so familiar with. He comes from a Sephardic world where he was known to be the prime Gadol Hador. He was known to be the greatest posek of his time. He was known to be the greatest rabbi of his time. However, we don't necessarily hear about his sefer, Oel Yaakov. It hasn't been printed so often, but for those people in the know, so for example, Chacham Ovadia, Rav Ovadia quotes Rav Yaakov Sasportas extensively. He was known to be what we would say the Gadol Hador. He was known very, very much to be one of the biggest rabbis in the world. However, he's known for something else, and we're going to get more into that a little bit later. Before we begin, I just need to give you a note on sourcing, because for me, I like to be very, very transparent about it. I know nothing. I'm just here to present what I've learned from my great rabbis, from my reading, and hopefully we can learn this together. This is an amazing book called Dissident Rabbi. I highly suggest it, from Princeton Press, from the great Professor Yaakov Dweck. Yaakov Dweck, he's from Princeton. Very, very, very fun read. Very, very good read. In addition, it's also from a fantastic podcast called Svarim Chatter Podcast, where it's super up my alley. It's all about different types of Svarim that are published, interviews with authors of books. I'm telling you, with professors, I'm in heaven. When I wash the dishes at home, Shoshana, that's always what I'm listening to. It makes me very happy. And also, it would be remiss of me not to mention Mori Rabbi, Rabbi Dr. David Katz from Baltimore. He teaches at Johns Hopkins, he teaches at TA, and he has a very popular podcast. What I've done for you guys tonight is that what I've included QR codes on page 2 of the sources on purpose, so that way you guys can listen to them, because me, it's just a pale comparison, very, very much so. So with that being said, here are a few of the sources that I used. This is my kitchen. I wasn't going to bring all of these, but as I was putting them into my backpack, I just kept on adding more and more and more because we're going to talk about, Bezrat Hashem, some of them. So like many of these people that we've been discussing, Rav Yaakov Sasportas comes from greatness. He's 11th generation from the Ramban. And I put over here Rabbi Blumenthal's incredible shiur. If you haven't seen it, it's excellent, available on YouTube. His amazing shiur all about the Ramban running away from Spain and moving to Eretz Israel in 1269. And he was very proud. Rav Yaakov Sasportas was very proud of the fact that he came from the Ramban. The Ramban's family name was Sasporta. And in Catalan, it's Sasporta. So what's also interesting is, and this will be a major theme over and over again in Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas' life, is that he was what we call Samiftet. Samiftet. What does Samiftet mean? It depends. There's a great rabbi named Rav Mazuz, who's from Zherba, a tremendous tzaddik. He's a rabbi of Yeshiva Kisei Rachamim. He says Samiftet means Sofo Tava, that please God, may my ending be good, may I have a proper Jewish burial. Why does he say that? Because the other way to say it is, what does Samiftet stand for? Sephardi Tahor. And what does Sephardi Tahor mean? It means that the family never, ever converted. The family never converted Christianity. And therefore you are a Sephardi Tahor. You are a pure Spaniard. And you never, ever converted, which is very important, as we're going to see. This over here is a GIF, or a GIF, I don't know how you pronounce it. This of the Spanish conquest, which we know we spoke about last time, all about the Reconquista, where the Al-Andalus, which very much was controlled by the Muslims, little by little, ends up being totally reconquered by the Christians. By, eventually, as we all know, Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492 is really where they make the Inquisition, as we're going to discuss. Rav Yaakov's family left a little bit earlier, actually. And this is something that people don't really talk so much about, unfortunately. Maybe we'll talk about this in the future. Rabbis on the Run. 1391. In 1391, there were major riots in Spain. And the way I like to talk about it is, for example, Kristallnacht. Many German Jews left Germany in 1938 because they saw the writing on the wall. Same thing also in 1391, that many of these Jews, including Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas' family, left Spain and instead went to Algeria, crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, and went to North Africa, especially. What I always find to be so interesting is that Ferdinand and Isabella, they kicked out an entire group of people who paid taxes, who knew how to read, who were real members of society, who not only that, they made money. They did everything. And yet, they kicked them out. And what I love so much about this is that Bayezid II, who happened to be the Ottoman Sultan at the time, he sends ships in 1492 and says, bring them over to the Ottoman Empire. And that's why I don't think it's a mistake that Spain has still not recovered, yet the Ottoman Empire ended up having its greatest time under under Suleiman, right after they end up getting the Jews, which I think, I don't think is a mistake. So his family ends up crossing, and he was what we call an Eloid. From a very young age, he was a great genius. So much that at the age of 18, he was already a Dayan. He was already a rabbinical judge at the age of 18, and at the age of 20, he was a rabbi of a community. And these are not just normal communities. These are places that, unfortunately, us in the Ashkenazic world, I'm talking about you guys, not me. I don't know why they keep on giving me all the Sephardic rabbis. I don't know, might be by mistake. But if you notice all these places, Oran, Tlemcen, these were places with tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. These were places with great rabbis. So to rise to the top of these places, that means you really need to be an A+ scholar. It means you need to really be beyond, really one of the greatest rabbis of the time. So, unfortunately, what happens to Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas is that he's a Dayan. He's a rabbinical judge. He's a rabbi, and two wealthy people come to adjudicate a case. And this story is a story all this time. He judges for one fellow, and the other fellow gets so angry. He gets so upset, he goes to the authorities. And in a place like North Africa, it's not hard to come up with any sort of, the Aramaic term is called namasla. It's so easy to come up with some sort of excuse, some sort of, I don't even know, some sort of way to get him into trouble. Maybe blasphemize, maybe stealing money, whatever the case is. And in North Africa, they don't take that very, very well at all. So he ends up running to a place called Saleh, which is in Morocco. Now here's where we go into, see the Malshinim. And what's interesting is he's actually thrown into prison. His son writes about this in the introduction to Yaakov. We don't really know how he escapes. It's some crazy miracle how he escapes, but he ends up running away. And what's so amazing about this place called Saleh, this happens to be the headquarters for pirates. For pirates. Now let's go move back a little bit and let's think a little bit about history. You have these Christians who overrun Spain, and you have all these Muslims crossing, and you have this major conflict happening over and over again, where you're having these Muslims, you're having these Barbary pirates taking revenge and really using their piracy to go ahead and take out their, I would say, revenge on the Christians. And this is a part in history that's just absolutely fascinating. You notice over here, they went so far, you can even tell, they even went to the British Isles, and they even went to Iceland. These are North African pirates, and they're going so high. To bring it all the way back to U.S. history, look at this. You have over here the Barbary pirates, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, he kept on paying. The way you would get through the Barbary pirates is very simple. You pay a tribute, and your boat goes through. Thomas Jefferson was the one who said, nah, we're going to fight them. What a problem. What a disaster. And so much so, America needed to start an elite unit, which we know to be the Marines. Oh, love it. I came in early to make sure this works. I'm not going to punish you by singing like that. Beautiful. I think we're good. But I think that that's really where, if you notice over here, this is where the leathernecks come from. Because you have these Barbary pirates who use their swords, and these Marines need to wear a special collar made out of leather to protect themselves against these Barbary pirates. And they practiced slavery. So many slaves. Historians argue about this, but it doesn't matter what they say. It's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of slaves, hundreds of thousands of European slaves. People don't talk about this so much, but it's a very, very fascinating chapter in world history. And this is where Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas is the rabbi. He's the rabbi in one of these headquarters of Saleh, which means down the street, there's these slave traders, and here he is having yeshiva. Because around this area, there's obviously economic activity, and obviously whenever there's economic activity, Jews move in. And that's exactly why he starts this yeshiva, and he becomes really one of the Gedolim of Saleh. However, he runs away. Why does he run away? Because he's still having trouble with the same king of Morocco. The same Moroccan king that was bothering him before was still harassing him. So he decides to run to Amsterdam, which I use as a pretext for talking about Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas tonight. And Amsterdam is an absolutely fascinating place at this point. The reason why is because it's the Dutch Republic of Amsterdam. And right now, it's the golden age. It's the best time for free economic activity. There's a great book that I have. I didn't bring it. I didn't have enough room. European Jewry in the Age of Mercantilism. And I have a fantastic article that I always show to my students. I teach social studies at Kassorla Day School. Mercantilism and religion. We're not going to read through this whole thing, but the gist of it goes like this. The gist of it is that mercantilism, which means you're amassing more goods, you're amassing more money. The reason why that's important is because now it means that when you trade with other people, it doesn't matter what the other country's religion is, because you only care about amassing money. That's the only thing that matters. Pure capitalism. And as it says over here, certainly no self-respecting mercantilist state could countenance persecution. After all, the suppression or eviction of any one religious group might well throw an entire economy out of gear. In addition, this means that Jews, and this is exactly what Professor Israel writes in that book I showed you guys, that this is really the beginning of religious tolerance and religious freedom for the Jews. Even though it might not necessarily be state sanctioned, nevertheless, this is how it's working. So what exactly is happening in Amsterdam at this point? What is happening? So Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas runs to Amsterdam. He cannot get a job as a rabbi. There's already 3 major rabbis there. There's already 3. One of them is exceedingly famous. One of them is very, very famous, although not even close to Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas' level. Like we mentioned before, Rabbi Sasportas is a top scholar, the creme de la creme, one of the Gedolei Hador. And the other rabbi is not. Not at all, but very, very important nonetheless. And this rabbi is, let's show you, right over here. This is Menashe ben Yisrael. Menashe ben Yisrael. And the job that Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas has is editing the books and the writings of Menashe ben Israel. And we'll discuss that in just a moment. Because here's this community. And this is what it looked like back in the 17th century. This is the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. And this is what it looks like today. Absolutely gorgeous. And if you notice, really no difference. Really no difference. So what is the state of these conversos at this time? The state of these conversos is quite poor. Because for so many years, for about a century, many of them have had to live as secret Christians. And therefore, they were brought to church. And therefore, they listened to what the priests were talking about. What were the priests saying? Judaism is a false religion. The religion of your fathers is fake. It's not true. It's not great. It's horrible. And then they would go home. And once they reached of age, what would their parents tell them? Parents would say, Christianity is not true and it's fake. And Christianity is something that's not right. You shouldn't be Christian. Whoa, talk about having, 2 competing ideologies. On the one hand, at the church, they're being told Judaism is garbage. On the other hand, at home, they're being told that Christianity is not the best thing. That is a very, very hard place to be. And not only that, if you're in church, what are you reading? You're reading the Old Testament. If you're reading the Old Testament, that's only the Torah Shebichtav. What about the Torah Sheba'al Peh? Look over here. What about the 39 Melachot? What about the 39 different prohibited activities on Shabbos? You're going to tell me, Tochein? Where's Tochein? I don't know. Ha'useh Shevat Nirin? Where does that show up? Where exactly are all of these malachos? Where do they all come from? Walking outside of a domain? None of this stuff seems to use a Yiddish word, my apologies, shtim. It doesn't seem to make any sense. In addition, tefillin. Tefillin? What are these boxes? They've never done it before. So what are they doing now? What is this? I understand it says the word totafot, but what does that even mean? In addition, Brit Milah. Brit Milah. He has in the Sefer Yaakov. He has cases where you have people who said, we cannot get a Brit Milah. Why? Because they're traveling all over the Christian world. And who were these people in Amsterdam? Totally, these were people who were conversos. These were people who had pretended to live as Christians, but yet internally they were Jews. So they had different ideologies. They had these, also to use another Yiddish term, krum hashkafas. They had a hard time trying to reconcile all of this, which is why, as my very good friend Mr. Schaffner He came over to me earlier and he asked me about Spinoza. Now we can really understand where Spinoza, Benedict Baruch Spinoza, where could his thoughts come from? He's told on the one hand, Judaism is not real. He's told on the other hand, Christianity is not real. What are you left with? Nothing. Right? No religion. So here we have Menashe ben Yisrael. And Menashe ben Yisrael was also a converso, along with the other two rabbis of Amsterdam. They were also conversos. And here comes a Sfarik Tahor coming into Amsterdam, who's a better scholar than them, and who happens to have the right hashkafos. And what the eternal credit to Menashe ben Yisrael, he built such a beautiful relationship with Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. And even though he was not officially a rabbi, he was really part of the community. He was very well respected. It was obviously, there was an uneasy tension, obviously, whenever you talk about a great scholar being in a place where you don't necessarily have that caliber of scholars. Nevertheless, he was super, super helpful to Menashe ben Yisrael for something that's excellent. And here we go. Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell was a Protestant. He was a very, very religious. And as we know, he took over, obviously, England during this time. And for the very first time since 1290, Jews were readmitted to England. Now, it wasn't official. It was unofficial because the other Christian businessmen did not want it. They did not want Jews in because it would mess up their competition. But yet, Oliver Cromwell said, these people are great. They make a lot of money. They pay taxes. They're lawful. Why can we not have them come into our country? And therefore, the unofficial position was if Jews came into England, they would not be kicked out. They would still be allowed to stay. And that's why one of the people who Menashe ben Yisrael brought with him to talk to Oliver Cromwell was our fantastic Tzaddik today, was Rav Yaakov Sasportas. Because Rav Yaakov Sasportas was someone who had a lot of charisma. He was somebody who was very classy. He was someone who knew how to get along with people. And because of that, he was a fun person to talk to. We're going to see it's actually very, very different than what Gershom Shalom writes. Gershom Shalom has an axe to grind against him. We'll talk more about that at the very end. But what's interesting is you could tell about this from his career. So much so that who ends up changing his mind and doing tshuva? The Moroccan king. And he says, I need this person. I need Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas to be my ambassador to Spain. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. And this is something that my Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Dr. David Katz, he talks about beautifully. And he says this because there is a big issue when it comes to talking about the Spanish Inquisition. To talk about the Spanish Inquisition. Most people think that what was the Spanish Inquisition about? If you're a Jewish person in Spain, they would come and kill you for anything. You had to hide in the basement and all these things. The truth is, that's a bit of a misnomer. If someone was a new Christian, if someone converted to Christianity from Judaism, or if their ancestor did, then they were under the rule of the Inquisition. But what if someone never had a family member who converted? The truth is they were safe. They did not have to run away. In fact, so much that if they went to Spain, Spain would not kill them. They might say, get out, but they wouldn't kill them. They wouldn't burn them at the stake. I know all these stories I read as kids, all these Avner Gold stories. What's happening? My whole childhood. But this is really true. And what's amazing is that now we talk about someone like Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas, who was a Jewish Jew, someone whose family never converted, someone who was a Sfardi Tahor, someone whose family never, ever, ever became Christian. He was able to go back to Spain. And not only that, he was able to go back to Spain as a diplomat, which is just mind-blowing. It's like a movie over here. But what does he see in Spain? He sees that mystique of España. Everyone likes to talk about the old country, about how things were always so much better back in the day. He sees it's not true. He sees this farewell España. Goodbye. This is over. We need to move on. So where does he move to? He moves to London. He moves to London in 1664. And London was a new community. London was a community once again, due to Oliver Cromwell letting the Jews back in. Now it can become an economic center. Now, due to mercantilism, Jews can now live there, and Jews can now trade there, and Jews can now be economic powerhouses for the Cromwell government, and later on, as we're going to see, the Restoration. And this is what's awesome. When the Restoration happens in 1660 with Charles II, he wasn't someone who was really so, I would say, religious. Quite the opposite. So much so, there was a reaction to the Puritanism of Oliver Cromwell. In fact, they say about Oliver Cromwell that his was the only army that didn't rape and pillage because they were so scared, because they were so, quote unquote, from. They never raped and pillaged. But here, under Charles II, he could care less about that. He was someone who didn't care what the Jews did. And Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas writes about this, that Charles II was against different types of Christian groups getting together. There was this thing called the covenantal. I forgot. I wrote it down somewhere. But he was against Christians meeting together. And they had a special restriction. 10. You're not allowed to have 10 people. It has to be 5 people or less. If you're Jewish, that's a very big problem. We need to have a minyan. So Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas himself goes to Charles II, speaks to him, and convinces him that Jews are not an issue. And that therefore you can have Jews meeting together, 10 plus, you can have a minyan. And the craziest part is he writes it in the tshuva, he can't believe it. Charles II changed it without accepting any bakshish, without any taking any money. And he couldn't believe it to have a ruler during the 17th century who does something out of the goodness of his heart. He can't believe it, but that's precisely what happened. However, he only stays there for a very short time for 2 very easy reasons. Number one, there was a great fire of London, and then there was something called the Great Plague. And he runs away. He's like, I can't deal with this. His community is like, no, stay. He's like, I'm not getting paid enough money to stay. For sure not. And he runs away. And where does he run away to? He runs away to Hamburg. Oh, this is one of my favorite things. You might think, Hamburg? Northern Germany? Sparta? Yeki, Sparta? I thought that's just me who started on time at 7:30. Yeki, Sparta? Are you serious? Look at this. Why? Because the Elbe River. Because over here it was a major source. It was a major economic source for Europe. And therefore, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas moves to Hamburg and becomes a regular person there. He's not a rabbi. He's doing rabbinical type things, but he's in Hamburg. And this is where everything blows apart, because this is what he's most famous for. And this is incredible. Oh my gosh. Because what happens while he's in Hamburg? Oh my gosh. This could be hours, but I'm not going to keep you here. Don't worry. Trust me. 1666. Shabtai Tzvi says, I'm coming. Mashiach is coming. Now what's fascinating is that as Gershom Shalom writes in the book, he happened to be a bit bipolar. He had his happy times. He had his manic depressive times. And during one of his manic depressive times, he says, I can't deal with this. I'm 38 years old. I'm newly married. I don't like this whole Mashiach thing. I'm having all these weird visions that I'm Mashiach. I need to go to a doctor. And like we spoke about so many years before, we spoke about the Baal Shem Tov, and we quoted Moshe Rossman's fantastic sefer, founder of Hasidism. What does it mean to be a Baal Shem? To be a Baal Shem is equal to doctor. The Baal Shem will help you spiritually. I'm having heart issues. I have depression. I'm morose. How do I fix myself? You go to a Baal Shem. He tells you about your neshama. And he decides to go to the greatest Baal Shem of his time. And who does he go to? Nathan of Gaza. Natan Azati. And Nathan of Gaza was only in his 20s. But even at that point, he was a very, very impressive individual. Someone who was the real deal. In fact, I've brought for you guys source one over here. This is from Gershom Shalom's book. This is Nathan of Gaza testifying about himself. He says, when I attained the age of 20, I began to study the book of Zohar and some of the Lurianic writings. According to Talmud, he who wants to purify himself receives the aid of heaven, and thus he sent some of his holy angels and blessed spirits who revealed to me many of the mysteries of the Torah. Keep in mind, the Beit Yosef, Rav Yosef Cairo, is having the exact same visions also. And he writes an entire sefer called Magid Mesharim, all about these visions, all about these angels that come to him, the Magid that speaks through his mouth. So this is something that's going around. In that same year, my force having been stimulated by the visions of the angels and the blessed souls, I was undergoing a prolonged fast in the week before the Feast of Purim, having locked myself in a separate room in holiness and purity. The Spirit came over me. My hair stood on end, and my knees shook, and I beheld the Merkava. He saw the heavenly chariot, and I saw visions of God all day long and all night. And this is not someone, he's someone that everyone went to. And not only that, he was a great Talmudic scholar. And not only that, he came from a great family. And not only that, he married into great Talmudic Chachamim. And this is one of the weird things, because he has a vision, Nathan of Gaza, that the Mashiach is here. His name is Shabtai Tzvi, and he shouldn't do anything, because guess who's coming to visit him? Shabtai Tzvi. And a little bit later, coming from Egypt, because he's so morose, because he's so sad, he comes over to Nathan of Gaza, and he tells him, he says, I keep on having all these weird visions on Mashiach. Please help me. And what does Nathan of Gaza say? Instead of trying to fix him and saying, no, go to the psych ward, he says, you're right. You are Mashiach. You are Mashiach. For a whole week, it says, Shabtai's feast kept on saying, no, and they go on all these walks, and it takes another 6 weeks until finally the patient is convinced by the doctor that, yes, he is Mashiach. He is Mashiach. And this is where this whole, and it's so strange because I have so many amazing books over here. I have this book called Sabbatean Heresy. I have this book over here about the Frankists called The Mixed Multitude, which is a generation after. I have this book called The Pursuit of Heresy, about Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz. But this is the one I was looking for. Women, and the Messianic Heresy of Shabtai Tzvi. You guys know who this is? This is Eva Frank. This is a picture of her. Who had a picture of Eva Frank on his bureau drawers? Do you know? Louis Brandeis. I know. It's very interesting. Justice. Yeah, Justice Louis Brandeis. He had it on his bureau drawers. He had a picture of Eva Frank because he came from a Frankist family. And it was crazy. It's insane. You can't make it up. But why am I saying this, guys? Because if you look over here and you look in this book, all of these women, they're all having these prophecies that Shabtai Tzvi is Mashiach. Everyone, you have 500 prophets saying Shabtai Tzvi is Mashiach. You have women who are just quoting Zohar. How do you know Zohar? They don't even know Hebrew. They're quoting Zohar, this very difficult Aramaic. This is something going on in the world. And not only that, it's happening in the Muslim world. It's happening in the Christian world. Everything is so hard. Everything is so difficult. Can you believe I taught a whole day of school already? Oh my God. I know, I'm just starting. But not really. So what had happened right before Shabtai Tzvi? Rabbi Moskowitz gave a masterful, incredible shiur where he quoted from this amazing book, Rescue the Surviving Souls, from Professor Adam Teller from Brown. And part of the issue was, and this is Chemnisky, Bogdan Chemnisky. My wife, for example, who's sitting in the back over there, Shoshana has been to Ukraine how many times? 8 times? How many times? 7 times? 5 times? Oh, 6 times. All right. Tell me. Don't tell me because I want to embarrass her. She doesn't like talking. But what exactly do they have? What statue do they have in Ukraine? They look up to him. He's their George Washington. They love Bogdan Chemnisky. Yet to us, as we all know, whatever number it is, as Rabbi Moskowitz spoke about so masterfully, it was an absolute disaster. It was horrible. Jews thought that Mashiach was imminent because the Jewish people were at a nadir. Things were so low. Things were so hard. How were things ever going to get better? We just need Mashiach. So people were willing to follow along. And here, I just want to share with you guys a fantastic article from the great Dr. David Berger from YU. He's tremendous. And he brings up something very interesting. We're going to go through this very, very, very quick because we don't have that much more time. I don't want to take up too much time tonight. If you could tell, I didn't prepare so much. So you see over here, the Rambam writes over here in the Mishnah Torah. He talks about Mashiach. And the reason why I want to learn this with you is because I want to show you what exactly is happening right now to Rav Yaakov Sasportas. What issues does he have trying to combat the false Messiah of Sabbatean, Dr. Morris? How's he doing it? So take a look inside, guys. Take a look inside. If you take a look, I have this source. I know it's on the over here. Source 2 on page 2. It should not occur to you that the King Messiah must bring wondrous signs or perform marvels or invent new things or revive the dead or anything like what the fools say. It is not so. Now, if a king should arise from the house of David, who is versed in Torah and engages in mitzvot, as did David his forefather, in accordance with both the written and oral Torahs, and he enjoins all of Israel to follow in his ways and encourages them to repair his breaches, that he fights the wars of God, i.e. he defends Israel, then he may be presumed to be the Mashiach. If he succeeds in his efforts and defeats the enemies around and builds the sanctuary in its proper place and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is definitely Mashiach. Last time we learned together, we learned all about the Rambam. I know it was very controversial. Man, I've been getting a lot of emails. The Rambam writes over here a very rationalistic way to understand what Mashiach is. No miracles, no crazy signs or wonders, very, very easy checkpoints, right? Very, very easy checkpoints. Now take a look at Mishnah Torah, the very next paragraph. But regarding all these matters and similar, no one knows how it will be until it will be. For these matters were unclear to the prophets. Even Chazal, even the sages themselves, did not have a tradition regarding these matters and only could attempt to understand the verses. Thus, there were disagreements in these matters. Nevertheless, neither the order that these events will occur nor their details are fundamental to the religion. Thus, a person must never busy himself with the Agadot and not dwell in the Midrashim regarding these matters or similar issues. He must not make them a dogma, for these do not result in either love of God nor fear of sin. Similarly, one should not calculate the ends. Rather, one is to simply wait and believe in the principle and not contemplate the details of this matter, as we have explained. What exactly is the Rambam trying to do in the second part of Perek Yud Bet? What's he trying to do? And this is something that Dr. Berger writes. And he writes about this. It's a fantastic article, which is called The Irony of what the Rambam is trying to do over here, because there's an unintended consequence. And here it is. What the Rambam writes over here, he has two parts. He says, we don't know how it's going to be, and don't worry about it. We don't know how it's going to be, and don't worry about it. That second part, don't worry about it. What's the Rambam trying to do? The Rambam is trying to temper the expectations of messianism. He's trying to lower those types of feelings. He's trying to lower the temperature. But there's a big problem. By having such easy checkpoints, who's to say who Mashiach truly is? Because of this line. But regarding all these matters and similar, no one knows how it's going to go down. And what does that now open up the door to? Exactly this. Sabbatean Tzvi. Because look at this. Did he come from the Davidic dynasty? Yeah. It's not so hard to do. Trace yourself to Rashi, you're good to go. Study Torah. Absolutely. In fact, I have a new article that was just published by Ma'oz Kahana right over here. And it's called Sabbatean Tzvi Ish Halacha, where he brings up, it's a 50-page article about his halachic bona fides and about his childhood Tshuvot. It's fantastic. Did he perform mitzvot? Oh, you better believe it, absolutely, as we'll get to in just a moment. Did he fight the wars of the Lord? It depends what you mean. Are these literal wars? Maybe they're wars that are going on internally between him and the Yetzer Hara, between him and whatever impure things are in the world. Who says it as literal? And did he convince Jews to follow the Torah? Oh, you better believe he did. Oh my gosh, he did. And if you take a look at our sources, I gave you guys selections from this amazing book called Sabbatean Heresy by the great Pavel Mishenko. He's excellent from Johns Hopkins University. He's the one that wrote The Mixed Multitude. You'll love it if you buy it. I don't make any money off of these, but I'm telling you, you would just love it. And please take a look at the bottom, and not at page 14. Page 14, it should be the 5th page in the packet. And I want you guys to see from contemporary times, he's writing to Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas about what's going on. And he writes over here, I have no more appetite. This is the second paragraph down on page 14. I have no more appetite for engaging with your verbiage, which, unlike my time, is endless. It is now midnight. I must get up before dawn to pour out prayer and supplication to our God. Our whole community is sanctified to a degree beyond words is power to express. You yourself, if you could only see it, would admit it is the Lord's doing. The synagogue is thronged all day and all night as on Yom Kippur. Shabbat donations have amounted to 10,000 guilders. Benches have been added to our Beit Midrash as on one glorious day of the past. You would see a world topsy-turvy, all the dicing houses and lotteries forsaken through the initiative of the people themselves, without any prodding from their leaders. Instead, they immerse themselves in Hashem's Torah all day and all night, performing the perfect penance of self-flagellation. That means giving themselves, hitting themselves, exactly. Demonstrated by Rav Judah, all their conversation of our holy Torah, the word sent by the Lord to Yaakov. Who? Which rabbi is going to get in the way of this tshuva movement? Which rabbi is going to get in the way? It's very, very difficult. Your people they've put away all of their fights, all of the petty fights. People are coming to shul all the time. No one's talking in shul. Can you imagine? Tzedakah. People are willing to give up everything. In fact, I saw I can't believe I'm blanking on it right now, but Gluckel of Hamlin. She was ready. She's one of the greatest diaries. It's fantastic. She made a new edition. It's great. She writes in her diaries that she was willing to give up all of her property on 10 cents to the dollar in order to move straight to Israel. And there were people that did that. And who's going to get in the way of that? Especially when you're talking about all these conversos who we spoke about before. We're already dealing with so many issues in terms of believing in Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. And here, they totally believe. How could you say no? But yet, here we go. Even Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas, and this is in his diary, he says, I think Shabtai Tzvi is wrong. But even he writes about his own self-doubt in his personal diary. Where he says, Hashem, please forgive me. No, I was only doing this for you. If I'm wrong, I'm so sorry. This is where we see the Rambam rearing his head again. Because what does Nathan of Gaza say? As the great luminary Maimonides, the Rambam testified, their words will only be understood only when the events actually unfold. Which means we don't know how Mashiach is going to go down, and maybe Shabtai Tzvi is the way it's going to go down. And that's why we just had this Haftarah for Sefer Shemot. The Sefer that Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas writes is called Tzitzat Novel Tzvi, which means the withering of the, the pride of the, woe to the crown of the pride, the young fruit. Tzitzat Novel Tzvi. Here it is. If you ever see this in any used bookstore, buy it immediately, because it's impossible to get. I've tried, I can't get it. Tzitzat Novel Tzvi, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. It was put together by Isaiah Tishby from Israel. He had been given a lot of the material by Shalom. Shalom didn't have time to do it, but Tishby does such an amazing job on it. And the only rabbi at the time, and you guys can look, the hour's late, but you can look at these sources and you can see that he was very, very clear about this. Actually, we will read one source. If you take a look at page, we just have to see what he says, because he's so strong about this. I love this. If you take a look, here we go. If you take a look on page 18, which is the 9th page in our booklet. It says over here, second paragraph down, I have given my closest attention to your letter. This is one of his friends who writes this letter and tells him, you're wrong about everything. You got to give everything up. Believe in Shabtai Tzvi. He says, written in your own hand, in which I am exhorted to recant and repent of my evil ways. Right? As though I was some godless scoundrel. There's not a single rabbi in any region who has the right to speak to me that way, even if I had committed some acknowledged misdeed, far less turn my virtues into faults. And he continues talking all about how he doesn't believe in Shabtai Tzvi and how he doesn't think he's correct. And the main thing, if you take a look At the next page, on page 19, he says, the situation, the end of the third paragraph on the page. The situation changed only with the arrival of the news that the court had upheld the ruling that the fast of the 10th month be abolished and turned into a day of feasting and celebration. Or Yaakov Sasportas says, he says, I'll tell you why Sabbatean feast is not real, because he's starting to abrogate the Torah. To say that the 10th of Tevet doesn't exist, and later on, they're going to have a fast day on Tisha B'Av, that can't happen. Once you break halacha, that's done. You can't deal with that. But you can see the other side. The other side says the Messianic era has come. Who says that the Tisha B'Av needs to still continue being a day of fasting? Like we know the Nevuah says, it's supposed to be a day of feasting, right? When Mashiach comes. That's how it's supposed to be, a day of happiness. Yet over here, what we see is that he didn't agree. Rabbi Sasportas says no. And this just leads into so many other issues that was happening with the Sabbatean movement, including, for example, eating chaylev, eating the prohibited fats. They would make a special bracha. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Hashem, with the Sephardic accent, Hashem, you have allowed me right now to eat and benefit from this thing which is normally usher, but now that Mashiach has come, oh, that's all over. That's all over. And the way that Nathan of Gaza explained it is no, he needs to reach into the depths of sin and go into sin and do things inappropriately. For you and I to do that, that would be an Avera. But for the Mashiach to do that, he's actually fixing the world. He's cleansing the klipot. He's going into the netherworld and saving the world. And we're almost at Mashiach time. This is beautiful. It comes from Theology in the Responsa by Louis Jacobs. That's where I saw it from. He's very interesting. Talmud of Rav Dessler that went on the Derech. It says over here, quoting the Rashba, it has always been a credit of Jews that they prefer to endure the bitter yoke of exile than to entertain false hopes by critically accepting the claims of messianic pretenders. They did not believe in even Moshe until he demonstrated the truth of the message by the miracles he performed. So Rav Yaakov Sasportas writes, based on the Rashba, he says, you think I'm wrong by questioning Sabbatean feast? He says, no, that's the greatness of the Jew that we always question. And we're not going to blindly accept Sabbatean feast as Mashiach. And he was right. Sabbatean feast was brought to the Sultan, as is well known, and he's told, you either convert to Islam or we cut off your head. And listen, he was not a corsair, you know what I mean? He wasn't a Marine. He didn't have the leather neck. You either die, let's try this. If you're really Messiah, you know what? The sword's going to break right on your neck, or you convert to Islam. And he decides to convert to Islam. And that really is the end of the movement for most people. There's a great book. As you guys know, I love books. I've been able to tell. I'm a big bibliophile. There's a fantastic book called The Burden of Silence about a group called the Dun Met. The Dun Met even exists until today, believe it or not. And many of them, they used to go out to the, I believe, the Aegean Sea, waiting for Sabbatean feast to come. And what day would they go? They would go on Tisha B'Av. Because guess what? That's the birthday of Sabbatean feast, which was also Shabbos. So I don't know. It doesn't get any better than that. I don't know. Is he Mashiach? No, for sure not. But for sure, Ataturk might have come from the Dun Met, which is very interesting. That's a whole different discussion. All right, that's for history. So he was right. But there's a problem with being right. When you're right about something, everyone else is wrong about it. Everyone said it's not true. For example, listen, I'll say it. I said it in the past, so I'll say it again. The Taz sends his kids and his son-in-law to go see whether or not Sabbatean is Mashiach. And I know there's all these legends. What we really have from the Taz is that the Taz said, yeah, he's Mashiach. Because the kids came back and they said, of course, he's Mashiach. Many people, Rav Chaim Ben Venissi, the great Knesset Gedola, he was a big follower of Sabbatean feast. Yet after he converts to Islam, that is it. It's over. The problem with someone who's right is hard to have him around. Because it always reminds you, especially when you discuss these Christians. Christians are coming over and Christians are saying, you think you know about Messiah? You think you know that you're right about Mashiach? Maybe maybe Jesus is a real Mashiach. How do you know? You thought this guy Shabtai Tzvi, the charlatan, was Mashiach. What do you know? So he has a pretty rough time. And that's why, according to one of the ideas posited by Yaakov in Dissonant Rabbi, is that the reason he didn't publish it was because it was really such a horrible time for the entire Jewish people, where no one looked good, except for one person, except for Yaakov Sasportas. But no one looked good, so he never published it in his lifetime. He never published Tzitzat Novel Tzvi, the withering of the flower of Tzvi. He never published it during his lifetime. It only lived on later and was put together by Tishby. So he ends up moving to Leghorn, which really finishes the four major areas where Spanish and Portuguese are. Number 1, Amsterdam. Number 2, London. Number 3, Hamburg. And number 4, Leghorn, Livorno. And he moves to Livorno. He's also a rabbi there. He's fantastic. But then finally, he moves back to Amsterdam. And this is where he gets his due to a large degree. Because like we mentioned before, during the 1650s and 1660s, he was not asked to be the chief rabbi. He was not asked to be the Rosh Yeshiva. Those jobs were filled already. But now it's finally his time to become Rosh Yeshiva. Now it's his time to become chief rabbi of Amsterdam. And this is where he passes away. He ends up actually being very, very wealthy because his son passed away and his son had a ginormous inheritance and ended up going to him, which is fascinating. There are all these discussions also amongst the scholars all about how was his yeshiva. We had all these weird recordings of like the students, for some reason, staged some sort of rebellion against him. They wouldn't stand up for him when he had an aliyah. So that's why I wrote a ... at the end, because he does get his due, but what we see is someone who was very classy, someone who was super erudite, someone who had a great personality, but yet unfortunately went from place to place, and he was just never, ever, ever really able to find the true home until the very end, and even that with a little bit of difficulty. So now we finish up, because the last 2 chapters of Dissonant Rabbi, who would ever think on one slide would be Gershom Shalom on the left and Satmaruv on the right. Did I say it right? I don't know. I'm so sorry. Rav Yoel Teitelbaum. I know I gave a shir about him years ago where I discussed anti-Zionism. And at the end, someone got very upset at me and thought I was anti-Zionist. I'm like, whoa, no way. So what are the 2 different ways that these 2 very, very different scholars / rabbi / Rabbi discuss Tzitzat Novel Tzvi and use Rav Yaakov Sasportas? How do these 2 rabbis use it? So we'll start with Gershom Shalom. I provided for you, don't have to look at it inside, but I provided it for you. The last 2 pages of the packet are all a absolutely withering indictment of Rav Yaakov Sasportas, where he disagrees with almost everything I just said right now. Where he says, yeah, he was a loser, and he was an angry person, and he was very upset at everything. He wasn't. We have contemporaneous, accounts that he was awesome. So much so the King of Morocco wants to bring him as a fantastic ambassador. He wants him to join the State Department. He's not a turnoff. He's fantastic. He's awesome. Yet this is how Gershom Shalom uses him and portrays him. There's a whole bunch of discussions that Dweck goes into, which are fantastic, which talk about Gershom Shalom's own conception of Judaism. But I'm not going to go there right now. I'm just going to use something else. What does he mind Tzitzat Novel Tzvi for? He says there's no other accounts. Everything else got thrown into the fire. The one thing that survived was the Tzitzat Novel Tzvi, and the one thing that survived was the accounts of Rav Yaakov Sasportas at the time. And there's such a wealth of academic material in there, so much so, if you take a look in the back, Rav Yaakov Sasportas and his Sefer Tzitzat Novel Tzvi is quoted over and over and over and over again. You cannot have the academic study of Shabtai Tzvi without the Tzitzat Novel Tzvi. You cannot have that. So that's how one scholar used it. And with the very last thing, we'll discuss what I think should be an inspirational point, which I really like. At the very end, at the very, very end of his book, Dissonant Rabbi, Professor Dweck says that the Samnurov also uses Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. And how does he use him? Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas was the only person to come out against a popular movement. He was the only one. And everyone said he was crazy. Even his own students said he was wrong. His contemporaries said he was wrong. Everyone said he was wrong. Now we can start understanding why the Satmar Rav, who has such an anti-Zionist bent, who says that the state of Israel is really Maaseh Satan, or say it a better way, Maaseh Satan, which is really the work of the devil. How could Rav Yoel Teitelbaum look at Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas for inspiration? Everyone's telling you you're wrong, but guess what? You're right. And that's what he writes. And that's how he uses the Sitzat Novel Tzvi in his own Sefer, Vayol Moshe. So now we're going to move away from anti-Zionism and then with one last point. We're living in a time right now where things are very, very difficult. There's all sorts of different ideas in the world. We have all sorts of things bombarding us, whether it's inappropriate things, whether it's consumerism, whether it's different things that are trying to get us away from our Orthodox lifestyle. When I learn about Yaakov Sasportas, and I learn about this person, I don't necessarily go to the anti-Zionism part, but I think about our own lives. I think about our own Shmirat HaMitzvot. And Bezrat Hashem, the beracha to all of us, is that we communicate to the next generation, and we teach our kids and our grandkids that it doesn't matter what society says. What really, really matters is our own beliefs and belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And to quote Nathan of Gaza, which I didn't think I was going to end with this. We don't know how it's going to happen, but we absolutely believe it will happen. That Mashiach Zikenu will come, Bezrat Hashem. And Bezrat Hashem, we shall be in Yerushalayim HaKodesh. Thank you so much for joining.